Thank you very much to the Honorable Minister for kind of setting up the stage for this discussion that we're going to have. And this discussion really is the top-level view of a paper that's going to be coming out here in the next hour or so, that you'll be able to get a lot more information on how we think about, or how we should think about, locally led digital transformation. And just to start with that and to think about that and to add a little bit to Jude's presentation, locally led means transformation starts with people and it ends with people. And digital doesn't transform, but people transform. And that's what we need to be thinking about. How do we make the work that we do inclusive? How do we make sure that we include all of those people that the Honorable Minister talked about, including her auntie? So how do we make sure that they're part of digital transformation, and the way we do our work isn't digital transformation for those kinds of people, but it's with those kinds of people. So I'm really happy to have this panel up here with me to begin to talk about this very important topic. So maybe just, Varun, maybe with you we can start with, how do you define locally led digital transformation?
It's working? All right. Carl, thank you so much for having me on this panel. Good morning, everyone. So I think when we look at locally led digitalization, two things come to mind, right? One is sovereignty, and the second is sustainability to me, right? Sovereignty, because it is, when you look at the world today, right, everything is driven through data, through information, and it is essential that the people whose data it is have full control and access to that data. And for that to happen, you need to have it being done by people locally, being owned by them, and they are able to chart their destiny. The second thing that I feel is very important is sustainability. For sustainability to really, really kick in, the government, civic society, markets, academia, all of them must come around to believing that this is their system. They know what's best for their country. They know what's best for their interests. And then they become participative in that. We've actually had examples where, and I'm going to quote a quick example from India, a state in the east of India, 41 million population, slightly larger than Ghana, where we've seen a digital transformation evolving over the last 5 years, where the government now has transformed from being a top-down approach to being a bottom-up approach, where civic society, where people who are actually using technology are now coming and saying, here are the projects that we want to do. They are able to identify people who are able to fund it. And and this is a senior government official who's shared this information with us, is government spending has actually come down on technology initiatives because now the markets are actually coming in, civic society is coming in, and because it's owned by them, right, a lot of the transparency of that system is kicking in, which makes it far more efficient. So I think that pretty much in a nutshell is my thinking on that.
Thank you, Varun. Charles, anything to add from a UN perspective?
Good morning and thank you all. I kind of historically come from this community, and as I sat down this morning with my coffee, trying to figure out what were the most important things about this at that top level as you describe, I guess complexity and emergence on the one hand are key concepts to consider, and this is why I like the ideation around wicked problems, and exponentiality on the other. And so it's potentially opportunity, but it's also cacophony and noise. And so actually trying to figure this out is really, really important. And yesterday morning, I tried to sit in 2 concurrent conversations in the Kempinski Hotel, one led by the African Union about overcoming unconstitutional transition, suggesting the complexity of the problem. And in the next room, with Minister Ursula there and the IMF head, a conversation about embracing and harnessing artificial intelligence. And that simplifies or exemplifies the challenge that we face every day in making some of the discussions relevant to the context that we work in. And so in a sense, I'd like to invite you first, and you know, I understand this constituency a bit better. Most of my work was actually in the INGO space. To first step back from the digital piece of localization to the construct of localization and what it means. Because almost, if anything we do is not localized, then it's actually not going to be transformative. And some of the contestations I described from yesterday are at the core of that debate. So is it a value? And in 2022, we started a conversation around this with USAID and a number of kind of, for those of you in this space, you'll understand the Beltway Bandits about localization. And for a number of us, it was quite a surprise that we were having this conversation at all. So why are we having a conversation about localization in the first place, when actually it's a core value of what we should do? And in a sense, I invite you all to consider why this isn't a core value in many of your statements. It becomes a kind of, if you like, distinguisher for, oh, we do this in a local way, we try to do this. But actually, if this isn't at the core of what we're doing, then probably it isn't right. And so beyond sort of figuring out, well, how can I get access to an electric car here in Ghana? I also need to be able to drive it where I want to drive it to, not to drive it where you want me to drive it to. And so in a sense, the first piece is understanding that localization isn't about grabbing something and bringing it down or plugging it back in to a global system. It's enabling, and the key word is enabling, everyone to pursue their aspirations within that context. And I certainly hope that your paper talks about that. So it does imply some mindsets around systems leadership, that we are not in front, that we are behind, enabling and pushing, and that it enables us then to see the complexity in wicked problems, climate change and biodiversity loss and waste, and who's trying to chuck their waste where, and why do other people not want their waste chucked, don't want that waste chucked in their territory, and the whole kind of political dimensions that this concept brings. So it's not just technical, it's equally political. But also other challenges like reaching healthcare, some of the things that the minister has eloquently talked about. So that's the first thing I want you to grab in this conversation, and hopefully the paper picks that. The second is what I call the issues of everything. And of course, digital is at the core. If we are going to address wicked problems, we have to consider that digital is about business. It's about society and access to services. It's about peace and security. It literally is about everything. And so if we stick it in a silo, in a vertical, we're not going to be able to address the challenges that lie ahead. So we have to think of it more horizontally in how we engage it and apply it in those contexts, but very mindful that it is for those who ultimately will use it to own it and drive the car rather than be driven to a predefined destination. So that kind of requires a different mindset. And so when we talk about do no harm, can we go beyond the paternalistic notion of do no harm to actually unleashing the potential and innovation that sits everywhere, because indigenously that knowledge is as valuable from some community in Wa in the top end of northern Ghana as it is in Delaware. So let me just kind of like put those thoughts out to start with. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Charles. I think tomorrow we have to have coffee together. Sandra, over to you. How is your organization actually tackling this problem?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So just to start, maybe I could give a bit of a context of what digital localization would mean to me and how, as women of Uganda Network, based in Uganda, how we are tackling this. So for me, coming from a gender and ICT background, I would say that digital localization for me means women and structurally silenced groups able to use programming, digital programming initiatives, and this could be projects that are able to use it and access it to transform. And what would this mean? For me, it would mean being able to design this initiative with the users, ensuring that this initiative is being designed, especially with the women and structurally silenced groups involved, but also being able to use some principles such as the feminist principle of the internet that explores issues around that women's movement to be able to ensure that it look at the gender lens of women's rights. So as Women of Uganda Network, we have different initiatives and projects that we are doing locally in Uganda, and one of it is we set up a community network based in the northern part of Uganda. So how we look at it is being able to, first of all, understand what are the needs of this community. So we set up a community network in areas such as the farmers groups that are locally in the community, but also looking at areas such as the marketplaces, looking at the schools that are highly using the internet, but also looking at areas such as the government institutions that are in the area. So what we did is to find out how then our women are using the internet. So we did a study using gender lens, but also using the feminist principle of the internet to sort of find out, and to our surprise, we found out that women were not actually using the internet. Why? Is for us to understand the why is when we are able to have a digital localized aspect of it. So then we use this to sort of tailor our trainings, capacity building initiative. First of all, understanding why women are not able to access and use the internet. And one of it was women are being consumed by issues such as the reproductive roles at their home. So how do we then tackle this challenge is, first of all, involving the men in the work that we are calling a feminist-led community network, and also being able to teach them how to share the roles at home. So that is how we are doing it, but also looking at the skills aspect of it. Majority of the community people who are using the internet didn't have the right skills to use the internet. So we also designed sort of a capacity building initiative to ensure that these people are able to access and use the internet. Another way that we are also doing it is through our network organization. WUGNET is a network organization that involves about 67 members across Uganda. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we realized that majority of people were not able to, first of all, do their normal work because of the standard operation procedures that were put in place by the government and the overall people to protect them from being able to get in touch with COVID-19 pandemic. So we did sort of a study to find out what is the challenge that the member organizations were facing, and we narrowed it down to about 20 organizations because we realized that there's a huge gap between the urban and the rural areas. So then we did a study and to understand the impact of COVID-19 on these women-led civil society organizations, but we also wanted to assess the level of access and usage of the internet and the digital technologies that they were using, and also understand the gaps. So what we found out was that majority of the organizations were not actually doing the work that they're doing because of the standard operating procedures, but also they didn't have the tools that they needed to use, but also they didn't have the skills to be able to use to advance their work. So then we purchased about 20 computers to be provided to these members, 20 members, but also we provided 20 smartphones to the members. So what we did was then design digital literacy programs that were then enhanced to these organizations. First of all, ensuring that the devices that were bought were figured with the right tools, such as the social media platforms that they needed, the Zoom platforms that they needed to be able to join the meetings online. But also, we also created like a web portal that had various information around gender and ICT, sexual and reproductive health and rights, agriculture, based on their needs. So then we started rolling out several trainings online, but also providing them with internet data monthly for about 2 months to enable them, first of all, to advance their work, but also to make their work known to the public, but also to be able to sort of advocate for the work that they're doing, to be known to the public, but also with the aim that if they're being empowered, how are they transforming this skill to the beneficiaries that they work with. So that was the approach that we're trying to do as Women of Uganda Network. I think I can talk from now until morning about the aspect of the work that we are doing around promoting digital localization. So for me, that is digital localization, being able to understand the needs of the community and being able to sort of design programming that is tailored to the needs of the community to be able to have an inclusive and equitable digital solution for the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I'm impressed that you use the data to understand the challenges that you have and then created solutions based on that data. So, any challenges from your side, Charles, that you've seen?
So first of all, let me talk a bit about kind of how the UN has approached this. Last year, and many of you were at the UN SDG Midway Summit, and recently the Africa Union is doing a similar thing around the Africa We Want Agenda 2063. It's really kind of around these 17 goals or the pillars in Agenda 2063. What's really going to drive this stuff forward? And there were 6 things that the UN identified as being critical, again, in this horizontal to drive things forward, particularly looking at this continent: food systems, jobs and social protection, education, energy and access to energy, which is really kind of key. And the obvious issues around the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity, waste and loss. But at the center of all of them is kind of digital and really integrating this into our work. Because in a sense, if you look at the kind of challenges we have, multidimensional inequality at the core of what we're trying to address. We have building of resilience, and it's a pity the minister has left. Up until last week, it was a complete no-no for satellite-based telecoms approaches. It was all cable only. What amazing stuff a crisis of 1 week can do, and now the government has just opened up the idea that we can now all face the skies to get our internet connectivity as well as we build resilience. And it's about accountability. I think this question that you were raising about how governments build from the bottom and using these tools effectively, because we do want speed, but we must be cautious. We do want scale, but we also want diversity, plurality, and multi-dimensionality in the work that we do. We do want integration and cooperation and collaboration, but it must be multiple ways. It must be both vertical and horizontal. Otherwise, it's just plugging into one system. And the real kind of transformation will come when we embrace this complexity and multidimensionality rather than try to kind of narrow it down, because actually at a global level, we're not able to find that sufficient consensus, hence these wicked problems that you've defined, and the need to use this approach to also approach digitalization. I think these are some of the things, and I guess in there I've answered your question. The real challenge is actually the knowledge exists, and it's often very technical and very available, but actually the contestations are equally political. And so again, and I'm sure this room is no stranger to the concept of political economy analysis, and the question of trade-offs and choices that parliamentarians like Ursula have to make as they jump from big vision around digital to make practical decisions in Parliament in the next 1 hour, that those choices are very real, and that how we're able to position and argue or advocate for the things that we feel are important, that's actually where the, sorry, I'm Nigerian. And by the way, Daniel, I agree about this center of the earth business if you have a wider definition of the location, right? And therein I have described the challenge that almost on anything we discuss, and digital is a part of that, it is how we're able to take account of context and the trade-offs and the political incentives that will enable these obvious no-brainers, which kind of, if you sit in a high place and think, well, why the hell aren't people doing this? That will enable us to make the breakthroughs. And so some of those are less technical conversations. They're actually quite tough conversations. And the last one, and I feel the positive energy in the room, so I don't want to kind of be a dampener for that. But an honest conversation about the big challenges and the fears that are out there, particularly as we start to discuss generative AI, right? And here's the question someone asked me, and I kind of then sort of said, well, I'm not quite sure what the answer is. They said, well, when AI starts to ask to be paid, how will it be paid? Where will it put this money, whatever that money is, and how will it spend it? Because it doesn't buy wache if you're Ghanaian, doesn't buy Gary if you're Nigerian. And so what will it do with this money? And part of the reticence, kind of like the ability that slows us down, is a worry. And I think that a conversation like this is really important so that we understand and gain collective understanding around what those challenges are and mitigating them. And the Secretary General is really pushing this. This year will be the Summit of the Future, and one of the tracks of the Summit of the Future, so please turn up, is going to be this digitization question and addressing some of these big ethical questions that will, if you like, unlock the space to enable everything else and the stuff that you're doing, which is amazing, to actually happen on the ground.
Thank you, Charles. I've never thought about where Gen AI is going to put the money. And I also knew we had a connection up front. My Nigerian name is Omowale. So, Varun, maybe talk a little bit about what needs to change, whether it's in your organization or, as Charles was talking, maybe the broader picture of what needs to change in order to really think about this equitable and inclusive future that we're talking about.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to start from where Charles left off on paying AI, right? I think, and that leads to the subject of safeguards. I think one of the things when we're looking at about digital localization and the speed at which we want to achieve it is we often compromise on certain fundamentals which will actually impact how you start using those systems, those digital platforms in 5, 10, 15 years, and it's the next generations that will actually be burdened, not just with other challenges, the big problems, the wicked problems that we have, but responsible use of those systems that were created a decade back without actually thinking of things like, what are the safeguards that you should have? How do you ensure that every person in the country has access to a service that's being offered on a digital platform? How do you ensure that there is interoperability so that data doesn't get locked into silos? Because that's a huge challenge, and there is so much potential political capital you can gain out of aggregating data across demographics into a single repository which is and can be misused. So I think those are the big fundamental questions that we should be discussing in an event like the ICT4D and saying, what are those principles? What are those best practices that need to get established? We as an organization actually, from a digital localization perspective, we engage with government, civic society organizations and say that you need to go digital, but you have to adhere to that. But being a INGO, well, we are kind of becoming an INGO, they hear us out, but listening and actually doing that is a little far apart. I think the last thing that one should think about is, and I come back to, one of the challenges that we've seen is a lot of these initiatives are either funded through multilateral programs or donor funding. And these programs are very targeted towards the intervention. They don't look at what will happen beyond the 2 years or 3 years of that program being implemented. How will the next 10 years play out? And I think that's another thing that one should think about. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Sandra, anything you want to close with? We have maybe 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, so what I want to close with, I think for me, another way or the most important thing for us to be able to have a digitally localized solution, especially for the marginalized groups, is to be able to prioritize the Universal Service Fund, which I feel is a very good aspect to deploy broadband connectivity, especially for the community not reached, especially in the rural areas. But with that, we need to ensure that solutions such as the Universal Service Fund is made independent and also is made in the way that is not influenced especially by the politics in the region. For example, we have in Uganda the Uganda Communications Commission that overlooks that. And in 2021, World Bank gave money to the Uganda Communications Commission that oversees the Universal Service Fund for it to be able to close the gender digital divide or digital divide in general. But up to now, we have not seen any change in regards to being able to improve service delivery, using digital to improve service delivery, but also to sort of achieve an equitable and inclusive digital aspect of it. Because we still have Facebook still blocked in Uganda until now from the 2021 general elections. How are we going to achieve that if challenges such as that, challenges such as access is not yet bridged? For me, I feel access is one thing. We need to ensure that for us to have a localized solution is to have access. And then we start looking at things like safety, security, but also how is this being used to promote an inclusive and digitalized future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And thank you so much for the panel here. I'm afraid we're out of time. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much. Oh.
I did want to make one last point, and I guess it's this community. So a lot of what we've said, I mean, it goes with the grain. I did want to emphasize partnerships for two reasons. One, because no one of us can do this together, and actually because of finance and the fact that increasingly these are finite financial spaces. So this word called the private sector has to really now become a more central feature of how the community that really sits here engages with all of these transformations that are necessary to really lift everybody out of poverty and address inequality. The private sector is key, and I think it's how are we able to engage that space as typical non-state actors to leverage the full potential in that space.
Thank you for that thought, Charles. Okay, we are finished now with the panel. Thank you so much, panelists. Can you please give a round of applause?